Good morning. Here's your early morning briefing for Tuesday, the 28th of January, 2025. I'm your host, Mark Nielsen. I'm joined by the team, Jared, Robert, and Mike Shelby. Hope everybody's doing well. Let's jump down inside our beltway here. Trump has plans to reinstate troops that were booted from the military over the vaccine mandate. This comes in line with several other major changes, including an announcement of banning transgender troops from the United States military. Robert, do you have any extra perspective on this? Any other details?
Yeah, this was actually a major campaign promise that Trump made. So along with some other things he's done in the first week, this is one of, keeping one of those major campaign promises. And this is actually going to restore some of these military personnel that were separated for refusing the vaccine to their previous rank and also give them full back pay.
And Robert, we're looking at potentially thousands of troops. Is that right?
Yeah, I think when I saw the number, the estimate was that almost 8,000 troops were separated over the vaccination.
Okay. And then on top of that, it looks like the feds have created a task force, and that task force has busted a $200 million LA port smuggling ring. Go ahead.
Yeah, this is the Justice Department's Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, and it said it arrested 8 individuals involved in a up to $200 million smuggling operation at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. And they said that the smuggling ring was bringing counterfeit goods from China to the United States. But I think something else important here is, according to indictment, the smuggling ring was also bringing illegal chemicals into the United States. I think it could be tied to something we covered in, I believe, 2023, where there were illicit biological and chemical labs found in California, tucked into residential and industrial areas.
And Robert, this task force has obviously its law enforcement, federal law enforcement, but also is this looping in some of these counter biological agents? I mean, this kind of brings a whole nother scope when it comes to a federal enforcement of these laws. Do you have any more insight?
I'm not familiar with if there are any specific, federal agencies that are tasked with hazmat or seaborne that are tied into this task force, but I imagine there are, considering it's a joint task force, and they have considering it's a drug enforcement task force, they have the potential to run into potential chemical hazards, investigating drug labs and things like that. In this case, illegal chemicals that were being smuggled into the United States.
All right. Thanks, Robert. All right. And finally, the Office of Management and Budget, that's OMB, issued a memo yesterday directing federal agencies to pause all federal grants and loans and conduct a comprehensive review of all federal financial assistance programs. What's going on there, Robert?
So this pause is going to impact, according to this memo, up to $3 trillion in federal spending, and that's out of $10 trillion total dollars of federal spending in fiscal year 2024. What I think is happening here is the Trump administration is trying to get a fight over the Budget and Impoundment Act of 1974 underway as early into the administration as possible, because both Trump and his OMB director, Russell Vought, have said that this act is actually unconstitutional. What it does is it basically prevents the president from pausing spending directed by Congress. But I think a larger part of this is that the Trump administration is seeking a court decision that will allow it to make significant spending cuts that I think are going to undermine key Democratic and far-left patronage networks. And this has the potential to become a center of gravity for the Trump resistance 2.0, because from what I've seen over the last couple of months, Democrats and even the far left have been disorganized, divided on how to move forward. There has not been a lot of weight behind some of the resistance efforts so far, including from key Democratic political machines, like in California, for example. And I think this is the potential, because this is directly attacking funding for a lot of these Democratic and far left aligned nonprofits and NGOs.
Yeah, Robert, I think that's really good insight. We were kind of talking about this before we jumped into the show today. But when we're looking at the resistance, we've talked a lot about this, and we've predicted accurately that the deportations would become a major galvanizing force for Trump's resistance. And so we're watching this unfold. But as you mentioned, it seems to be a little bit haphazard, disorganized. There's a lot of attention going to other key executive orders within this first 100 days. But I think you're right about this, that this could potentially become a major center of gravity in the strategy to resist Trump, because you're looking at two different situations. You have a lot of support for mass deportations, or at least a strict crackdown on illegal immigration. It's broad. It's across the whole United States. But when you start targeting possible patronage within a system, you already have a natural constituency that's directly affected by this. And so I do think this is something that we'll have to continue to watch and to see if this does more of a center of gravity for the Trump resistance. All right, and then finally, just moving on, we have a Senate hearing coming up examining the Panama Canal and its impact on U.S. trade and national security. We will also be taking some notes there, and any significant developments we will be covering here on the show. All right, now let's move on to our situation report and our sit rep. Robert, I'm going to continue on with you. What's going on? Could you please take us through your sit rep items?
Yes, President Donald Trump issued an executive order on Sunday that directed the federal government to take more control over water management decisions in California. And this order also directs the federal government to override California authorities on the Endangered Species Act when it comes to decisions involving dams, reservoirs, and irrigating facilities in the state. And this has been a major point of contention between the Trump administration and California Governor Gavin Newsom and the Los Angeles local government, especially after these wildfires started. And moving on to the next item, Trump is clearing out government lawyers, and Acting Attorney General James McHenry fired more than a dozen Department of Justice attorneys who worked on special counsel Jack Smith's Trump prosecutions, and said that these attorneys could not be trusted to implement President Trump's agenda. The National Labor Relations Board General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo said she was fired yesterday by email. And Jennifer Abruzzo has been a major was a major Biden administration figure. She was pushing a lot of court cases over the non-compete clauses and a lot of union priorities and organized labor priorities during the Biden administration. And then next, Mark Green, who's the House Homeland Security Committee chair, said he's working on an automation initiative for the Transportation Security Administration. He said it's too early to provide details, but he did say that this initiative will increase privacy, efficiency, and speed at U.S. airports. And next, Mike DeWine, Ohio governor, urged the Environmental Protection Agency to delay enforcement of an ethanol and gasoline rule that's intended to boost higher ethanol sales. And DeWine said that new infrastructure to handle higher ethanol content fuel has not been built, and the rule would disrupt U.S. fuel supply chains. And this is something we heard from the energy industry, the fuel industry. I think when this rule was originally proposed in 2022 or 2023, when we covered it, that this was going to lead or potentially lead to supply chain disruptions with U.S. fuels. And it appears in the meantime, while this rule has been paused for 2 years, they have not built out this infrastructure required to handle higher ethanol content fuel. And then moving on, Feeding America Vice President Emily Engelhardt said that more employed Americans are turning to food banks to make up household food shortages in what she called a new era of food insecurity. There's also an interesting comment from a Washington, D.C. based Capital Area Food Bank. Their CEO, Radha Muthia, said that middle income and highly educated Americans are becoming increasingly food insecure. I think this is a data point that points to potential instability or a lot of unrest in the United States potentially, especially as we have they're talking about. It's not unemployed or necessarily low income Americans that are turning to alternative sources for food due to high prices. Now we're seeing more middle income and highly educated Americans looking for alternative sources of food due to inflation.
All right, thanks, Robert. Let's shift over to our global portion of the sit rep. Jared, what's going on with this discrepancy that we're seeing between repatriation numbers?
Good morning. So Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum announced that Mexico had received 4,094 deportees in the first week of the Trump administration, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement reported that they had only conducted 2,373 arrests at that same period. So that's about a 1,700-man discrepancy, and we know that some flights were also running to Brazil and Colombia because there was a spat over that. So the discrepancy is likely much larger. I don't have enough information to make a solid analysis on where all of these people are coming from, but we will continue to monitor and report.
All right, thanks, Jared. All right, now let's move on to our the day's warning items. Mike, what's going on?
Hey, good morning, Mark. Yeah, you've probably seen this Q winter boots trend it started on TikTok earlier this month. And these anti-Trump activists, again, predominantly on TikTok, started using cute winter boots as a euphemism to evade what they say is censorship on TikTok and maybe other social media platforms. But specifically on TikTok, they reportedly believe that TikTok is deleting or will delete or otherwise is censoring any kind of content related to anti-Trump activism due to this ongoing legal battle surrounding the future of TikTok and who's going to own TikTok in the next weeks to months. And so there are phrases there like, quote, "You need cute winter boots to protect yourself from ICE." And again, that is euphemistically referring to everything from anti-ICE protests to the need for firearms to defend themselves against immigration and customs enforcement operations. I was just watching a video this morning, like this massive conservative show on YouTube, and they're talking about this is the armed revolution. Like it's here. They're arming up over cute winter boots. And guys, I'll be honest, I just don't see it. I think there's a lot more smoke. There is some fire here, but I think it's a lot more smoke than fire. A lot of places have really run with this narrative that this means anti-Trump activists are finally arming up and they're purchasing firearms, and we're about to see armed resistance against Trump policies in the federal government, and we're going to start seeing ambushes on ICE. And I seriously doubt that will be the case over cute winter boots. Now, I don't think it's impossible that we get there. I just think it's very unlikely so far that we're going to have some national mass movement over this. I still think worst case scenario, we see early 1970s style type terrorism potentially. I don't think that's the most likely scenario, but I still do think that is the most dangerous scenario. Frankly, these are TikTokers. I don't see them going out and risking 20, 30 plus years in prison over bumbling over a pistol that they just bought at Academy, or I don't even know if Academy still sells them. But, I don't see these guys as like real revolutionaries and would be terrorists. They're TikTokers. Those people exist, but they haven't, really stepped off the porch yet. So this is something I'll continue to monitor, but on a scale of 1 to 10, this is like a 2 or a 3. It's not a 10, but a lot of social media outlets are making it out to be a 10. I just don't think it is.
All right. Thank you, Mike. All right, let's move on now to our next warning item. Looks like we have been monitoring some of these key tariffs, and we have a number of inputs that are very important to our economy, but also national security. Robert, as I understand it, we have some a new round of sweeping tariffs on some of these items. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, this was from the GOP retreat this week in Miami, and President Donald Trump during a speech there said that he's going to levy across-the-board tariffs on pharmaceuticals, semiconductors, steel, aluminum, and copper imports. And there was also word from people who say they're familiar with the plans that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is proposing a plan to levy a 2.5% global tariff with a gradual increase every month. I think this is part of the larger Trump administration reindustrialization strategy. The idea is that these tariffs will incentivize companies to bring production back to the United States, especially if some of these key inputs, some of these metals are important for electrical equipment and, of course, pharmaceuticals. A lot of those chemicals and medications come from overseas due to regulations. But I think tariffs on these products that rely heavily on overseas supply chains, like these medications and active pharmaceutical ingredients, are going to cause price increases and potential shortages as these U.S.-based firms begin to reshore production. Tariffs on copper and aluminum, I think, are also going to have a disrupting effect on supply chains for manufacturers of some other key things like energy infrastructure components, including transformers, power lines, because they've already reported shortages and significant commodity price increases of these metals since the COVID pandemic. And then moving on to the next warning item. Yesterday, there was a shootout between Customs and Border Patrol agents and suspected cartel members across the border near Front in Texas. You can see it down near McAllen as the border turns north. And they said the agents said they were responding to a group of immigrants attempting to cross the border there. CBP said that there were no injuries reported on either side of the border. And White House border czar Tom Homan said in an interview yesterday, something that we talked about in our report yesterday, there's going to be more violence on the southwest border as the Trump administration targets cartels and reinforces border security. And I think this is an important point in this area specifically, because the danger of confrontation between federal law enforcement and foreign organized crime is increasing as border and immigration enforcement efforts ramp up in these border states. And I think a key part here why we're seeing violence, a shootout here when there was not a shootout, for example, in the Denver case where they arrested 50 Trindera Agua members at a makeshift nightclub, is just because of the proximity to the border. Because this is not unprecedented, but I think the threat is likely increased due to these operations close to the border.
All right. Mike, what's your take on this?
Yeah, Robert's right on the money there. There's a long history of kind of pot shots being taken from the Mexico side of the border, whether it's coyotes, cartel members, drug smugglers. So this has been an ongoing problem for Border Patrol. And I know there's a lot of talk about cross-border operations and maybe the Trump administration pushing the DOD to do something more there. I would just say this: let's keep in mind a couple things. Number one, Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum has pursued AMLO's policies of hugs, not bullets. That was his anti-cartel plan. Essentially solve economic and social issues, and he said he'll solve the cartel issues, and that has just been an abject failure. Sheinbaum is continuing that. Whether she pivots, I don't know. We'll see. The second thing is I am somewhat hopeful that Sheinbaum and Trump will make some progress on border security, but ultimately this problem is not getting solved because this is an endemic problem across most of Mexico, and it's going to take a lot more than Sheinbaum to solve this problem, unfortunately.
Yeah, Mike, I think this is an interesting, we were talking about this before the show a little bit, but with this kind of being a gray area, because on one side you have historically cross-border operations. I mean, this has been done historically, most significantly around the turn of the century. This is kind of where you have Pershing and young Patton doing cross-border operations to chase Pancho Villa. So we do have there is precedent for this. But at the same time, it's one of those things that I think a lot of regular folks like us, we kind of forget that this would be a huge step to do cross-border operations. Does not mean that it's not on the table. Trump has intimated that is on the table. But you do have this situation where taking it over across the border would be a major step. And so I sometimes think a lot of people discount what that would mean. There's everything in terms of diplomacy. There's a lot of negotiating that would have to take place, I think, first. But then there's also this kind of dovetails into the same problem, is that you have cartels operating in 50 states. Now, traditionally, cartels don't really like to go toe-to-toe with the feds. This would be something that would be also difficult, and for them, it would probably impact their bottom line a lot. Would the juice be worth the squeeze? I don't think they necessarily want that kind of heat. But when you're dealing with a situation along the border, and these, you can't really control some of these different conditions, this could really be one of those escalatory situations on the border. And like you said, this is not going to be, it's not being resolved right now. It doesn't look like there's really a good plan in place, at least on Mexico's side, that there will be border security. And so, on one hand, I can definitely see that there would have to be a lot of negotiating and diplomacy first, but that doesn't seem to have worked. So I guess, it kind of throws us in this situation where it's really has yet to be seen. It is a gray area.
Well, and I think on the cartel side, this is basically unconventional warfare 101, because they are shooting from the Mexico side of the border where Border Patrol agents are not necessarily going to be able to pursue, and they don't have to inflict like massive casualties to disrupt, border security operations. They just have to basically create more friction and make it more dangerous for agents to conduct these operations, or make them more fearful of getting injured or killed. I think there's a lot of wish casting going on too about the response. Like there might be some kind of lawmaker pressure to do something about it, but I don't think that's going to lead to what some commentators are saying about basically, movie style military operations into Mexico.
Yeah, I don't see Sicario happening. This is really ultimately a sovereign issue of sovereignty for Mexico. One thing that we saw under AMLO, the previous president in Mexico, is anytime DEA got too close to his little peace deal with the cartels, DEA was sidelined. As a matter of fact, there was a counter drug unit being run out of Mexico City that apparently was like very successful. And I think they got a little bit too close to this, no pun intended, but this drug deal between AMLO and the cartels. And AMLO removed him. He basically kicked this DEA unit that was partnered with Mexican police, kicked him out of the country. And so we have seen this huge sidelining. And AMLO said, hey, this is national sovereignty. We don't want the United States here involved rooting around in our problems. Scheinbaum has continued that policy. I would say best case scenario, maybe we see a surge of the Mexican National Guard creating a buffer zone to try to keep out drones and keep people out of keep cartels out of the tunnels and keep those smugglers taking those pot shots against our border patrol and the National Guard and I guess active duty military as well. Maybe there will be some kind of buffer zone, but that deal has to be really sweet for Scheinbaum. I don't see why Trump wouldn't try to sweeten the deal. That's all I got to say.
No, great points. Great points. All right, Robert, how about you take us through the rest of your warning items?
Yeah, so Citigroup analysts yesterday said that in a report that the Trump administration energy policies are not going to hold back a transition away from high carbon energy sources. And they said this is due to a quote, sense of optimism for the green energy transition and a desire to produce cheap, secure sources of power. They also said that banks leaving the Net Zero Banking Alliance will not impede or dilute efforts to transition the U.S. economy away from high carbon assets. I think this is basically a sign of the reality of this fight against ESG and the green energy revolution, because these green energy revolutionaries are not going to roll over so easily. I think both for financial and ideological reasons, because there is a lot of money to be made building these solar panels and these wind turbines, and I think this might be an indicator that these green energy advocates are gearing up for some kind of renewed pushback on Trump's energy policies. But I think they're going to run into this obstacle that we've talked about a lot, where there's division and disorganization in the larger Democratic and far left Trump resistance 2.0. And I think one of those major obstacles has been that the Trump administration has basically done a speed ran, a lot of policy priorities in the first week in some of these executive orders, especially the energy related ones.
All right. Thanks, Robert. Let's move over to our global portion of our warning items. What's going on, Jared?
Good morning again. So the United States Coast Guard just finished up training the Philippines, Indonesian, and Vietnamese Coast Guards on Friday. And this training was focused on maritime law enforcement, which included vessel boarding, evidence collection, and arresting techniques to quote, address maritime threats. The Australian border forces joined as well, but only as observers, not as participants. Now, you may be asking, why does this matter? Intramural Coast Guard training in the South China Sea is normally focused on interdicting illegal fishing. The announcements for this completely neglect that focus entirely and instead preference maritime threats. Now, maritime law enforcement will be a critical piece of any potential blockade laid on China, which we've been talking about for about a week here. So I think this training may well play into those plans, as all of the participants also have open maritime border disputes with China. And moving right along, so America has an expanding grip on Cambodia. The American and Cambodian officials announced an intent to expand American and Cambodian trade ties. The Cambodian government says that America is their largest export market by a wide margin, and had expanded its trade by over 11% in 2024. The American Charge d'Affaires claims that USAID contributed millions to Cambodia's agricultural sector, which is also Cambodia's primary exports. Now, as far as why this matters, American trade was larger than the next 5 nations combined, and that includes China. In fact, I think it was about 8 times as much trade to America as it was to China. So America appears to be at least partially subsidizing Cambodian agriculture with the USAID investments. And this gives America leverage on China's closest ally and China's closest Southeast Asian ally and their only international Pacific outpost at the Ream Naval Base. Additionally, we've got some news on the Arctic. Denmark announced it will allocate about $2 billion to Arctic security. The investment represents about 8% of the Danish 10-year defense spending plan. The Danes intend to buy 3 new Arctic Navy vessels, 4 surveillance drones, and an investment in satellite surveillance. And lastly, Israel reported on Friday that it may take longer than anticipated to fully withdraw its army from Lebanon due to Lebanon failing to uphold their ceasefire requirements. The Hezbollah chief said they will not accept any delays from Israel, and Lebanon's government is requesting a timeline extension until 18 February 2025.
All right. Thank you, Jared. All right. That does it for today's report. Let's move on to a question. We typically try to get to your questions when we have a little bit of time. If we don't, we will always move them to our roundtable that we'll have on Friday. But we did have a question. Mike, I think this one is best answered by you. Bad Wabbit asked regarding the Black Bloc and other these far left groups. I understand that you don't see Black Bloc becoming an issue. What about insurgent groups? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I've been tracking these groups since 2016 and keeping a list of indicators. And just to give you some example, back in Thanksgiving 2016, we were seeing about 6 or 7 of these indicators that an indicator is an observable or potentially observable clue, particularly about a course of action typically. So I'm looking at indicators of will domestic armed resistance or insurgent groups begin active organized political violence, essentially. So we're at like 6 or 7 back in November 2016. 1 year later, we're like 12 or 13. And so that started to tick up. When you're at 6 or 7 out of 20, it is not imminent. And so I'm seeing well under 6 or 7 today. And so this is just something I'm not particularly concerned about at this moment. Now, if we see, the Trump administration has been going after illegal criminals predominantly, I think that's really hard to kind of attack politically. If he starts going after abuelitas and children, then maybe we'll see this anti-Trump resistance really heat up. But I'll tell you, I don't see that in the near term. Maybe in the spring and the summer, we'll start to see an increase in activity, but I'm just not that concerned about the armed insurgent, quote unquote armed insurgent groups. Like, even the armed leftist groups back from 2016 to 2020. I mean, even they didn't engage in organized political violence. So it's just not something that concerns me right now.
All right. Thank you, Mike. All right. Our last question for the day. We did have a question about what's going on over in the DR Congo. There was a question about what's going on over there, and then it seems like it's been escalating. I can definitely speak to that. Just to give everybody kind of a background of why it interests the United States is most recently there have been major protests over much of the civil unrest that's been taking place in the eastern portion of the DR Congo. This obviously DR Congo neighbors Rwanda, and this is an area that is highly rich in different minerals. There's gold. There's a lot of other kinds of mineral extraction, and then because the DR Congo is so poor, it's one of those things that's very important to the stability of that country. And so, as this has escalated, there have been different insurgent groups. One of them is called M23. It's mostly an ethnically Tutsi organization. Many of these Tutsis are kind of like cross-border between Rwanda and the DR Congo. And this group has formed kind of an insurgent group to ostensibly protect Tutsis in the area. But what's been happening is it has been attacking some of these mining operations. It's been attacking Congolese soldiers. And then they've also invaded major cities within the DR Congo as of late. Now, why does this interest the United States? Well, just recently, France, the UK, and the United States have had to shut down their embassies. There was a major demonstration just outside of the U.S. Embassy. There was some fires started. There were reports that the embassy was being attacked. I don't actually believe that happened. It was mostly, it seems to be isolated fires and things like that in the proximity of the U.S. Embassy. There have been a few threats made, but really you're seeing that there is this insurgent group. It's upending a lot of the social order within these cities between the residents there. So there's protests by the residents protesting what's happening, demanding more of a government response. And then there's also these insurgent groups that have actually taken, key areas of these cities, and they're actually claiming that they have these cities now. So this is going to be kind of this domestic unrest situation. It's an insurgent problem, and then also Rwanda is being blamed for some of these activities because it has ties to some of these groups. And then there have been allegations that they've been giving them weapons and so on. What's the big picture on this? This region of Africa, West and Central Africa, this area is highly susceptible to unrest. There are many insurgent groups. The United States in the past has kind of used training security for a bargaining chip to enhance relations there. But as we've seen as of late, the U.S. and France have kind of been on the back foot and being removed from these areas. So what does this do? That creates a vacuum. So we're going to be really interested to see kind of where some of these countries that are dealing with this unrest, where they turn to be able to stabilize their governments. But at the end of the day, we're dealing with a situation where there's a lot of unrest. There are key minerals, there's gold, there's other things that are at play here. So it does attract international attention. And I imagine that this will invite a lot of oversight from the UN and some other international organizations. So great question there. I wouldn't worry too much about it right now. The U.S. is going to shut down its embassy, probably restrict a lot of travel to the area, but we'll see what happens. All right. Well, we're running up at the top of the hour, or at the top of the show. We do appreciate all your support and for joining us today. As always, expect today's report in your inbox later today. Tomorrow, we'll be back at 08 Central Time for tomorrow's report. And then if we don't get to your questions today and then throughout the week, we'll try to address those during Friday's roundtable, which will be on Friday at 10 Central Time. So once again, thank you for all your support and stay out front.